Welcome. I'm your host, Dustin. Joining us today, the man behind the craziest film I think I've seen all year, CRABS. We're here to talk to Pierce Berolzheimer about his crazy movie, Let's Get Crabby Together. Pierce, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Dustin. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, and thanks to Screenbox for always letting me do these awesome interviews, talking to people about their films all the time. Like that's such a great platform. Awesome to see you amongst all these other crazy films that are.
Yeah, I'm really glad we ended up on Screenbox. They've been awesome. Like from the beginning, they've been super helpful, and yeah, they're great.
Yeah, seriously. If you aren't on Screenbox, you need to be so you can check out this movie and a ton of other ones. Um, Before we start talking about this film, what I love doing is always kind of dialing it back with the guests that I have on and start from the beginning. Like where all this kind of started with you. Where did directing or acting, producing, where did all of this like start?
Yeah. Um, so it started with South Park for me.
Okay.
I was obsessed. I thought it was the most unique, creative thing I'd ever seen, and it looked like something I could do. Which I was in I think seventh grade when I first started watching South Park,
Oh,
and
okay.
um, I was like, oh, I might be able to actually do this. And so I took I bought a bunch of construction paper and like cut out these little characters. And um, on my computer was like an old PC in like this little alcove in the kitchen, and on the wall, I set up all the little characters and put a webcam and like taught myself rudimentary stop motion animation,
Wow.
and I made a little short about hippies, and uh, then I did the voiceover and did the animation, and then I was hooked, and I didn't want to do anything else, and so but I had to go to school, and so any
Of
chance
course.
I would like have for there be to if there was like a big paper or some project, I would ask if I could do a film project instead, and most teachers said no,
Of
and
course.
some teachers said yes. So I got to do like I did a 15-minute stop motion animation based on Great Expectations.
Oh,
So I
wow.
like
That's awesome.
adapted all of Great Expectations, and I did the same thing for the Odyssey. And
Oh,
then
that's crazy. The Odyssey?
yeah,
Wow.
the Odyssey was, I mean, it's not good. It was made by like a
That's
eighth
still
grader.
very, very awesome.
But
Your younger
I
self
there was
doing it.
actually a there was a college class that emailed me and asked if they could use my stop motion video. Like a professor asked if he could use it
What?
for like a summary of the film or of the book for the class, and so it's on some curriculum
Wow, that's awesome.
apparently. Yeah. So yeah, so I did that for a long time, and then any chance I got like I knew I wanted to do film because there was nothing else that I liked doing as much as that. Um, and so every chance I got to do, like we used to, actually even before the stop motion, my brothers and my sisters and I knew every word to Billy Madison,
Oh,
and
okay.
so we would recreate Billy Madison, and we just switched the roles, but we'd like have this old like VHS camcorder, and
Oh,
we probably filmed like I don't know 60% of Billy Madison like three different times with each of us playing the different roles.
that's awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
You were really tackling as much as you possibly could. I wish I had time or like the motivation when I was younger to do some of these things. It's always so inspiring and awesome to hear. Filmmakers, actors, directors, whoever it may be, like where things start. And it's always like I watched something or my family had a camera and I just
Hmm.
started doing it. So it's always really cool to kind of hear where everything started.
Yeah, I was lucky that my family had a camera, and then it was just the webcam. I mean, honestly, it came from like I wasn't terribly good at drawing, and I didn't really have another creative outlet, but that was something that felt technical enough that I could like not have to be great at art
Yeah.
to learn how to do something artistic and creative, because I like computers. Like I liked I was big into like LimeWire and Napster, and like
Oh
tinkering with
yeah.
with ROMs and stuff like video game ROMs. And so figuring out the stop motion felt like just more computer tinkering. and so I was able to like be creative without having to be a good artist, like a physical like drawing.
Yeah.
Um, and then stop motion felt like, oh, I could at least just get the outline of a character done right, and then I could animate their limbs. Um, and that's where like South Park, I was like, it was the first time I saw animation that felt crude but enjoyable. Like I could actually, yeah, it felt doable. It felt like something I could actually do myself.
Yeah. Oh, that's South Park too. Out of all the things that were on
Yeah,
for South Park, I mean, I started watching South Park when I was, so I don't blame you, and still going strong today. It's still like one of
that's why
the
it's
biggest
great.
things.
I haven't seen the last season, but I love that it's still out there.
That they're never ever up. Their well is barely tapped.
Yeah.
All the things that are happening. That's
Oh, those.
awesome, man. That's really out to college professor, whatnot, of this thing that you just wanted to do. So inspiring.
Thanks.
I mean, thank you because it brought you to now this super crazy film that thanks
Yeah.
to Screenbox I watched, and I had other people, on socials when they saw this drop, they were like, yo. I was like,
Oh, cool.
okay. So I checked it out as soon as it was dropped, and I was like, yeah, you guys are right. It has so many things in it that like was harking back to my childhood, how things out. It gave me like a weird like Saturday morning cartoon vibe, and I love that a lot. So I wanted to ask you about that. Like, was there like an intention to kind of give you like a callback to like, I don't know, like the '90s, early 2000s, with the way that this is shot and written?
Oh yeah, I mean, that's precisely what I wanted to do. I wanted from the beginning, the goal was to create something that was like the exact movie I would have wanted to see on the shelf that I'd never seen before at my local Video World. Like I used to bike to my my it was Video World's what we had, and like every day I'd go and I'd pick out a new movie to rent, and I wanted something that was like that 14-year-old kid that was biking back and forth to Video World, like what would the perfect movie be for them? Like not something too scary because I was never as a kid I was never really into like the really scary stuff. Like the scariest I would get is like Lost Boys, Fright Night, vampires,
Oh, okay.
American
So you were
London.
like
Like
tiptoeing on like the horror right there.
yeah, I really loved that stuff. I wasn't super into like the slasher stuff or the Halloween. Like I later got into that, but for me it was Anaconda and Deep Blue Sea, like
Okay.
that kind of vibe. So I wanted to make a movie that was sort of could be like your first horror movie where it's not terribly scary. Um and it has that it's like the movie's supposed to be sort of this transition period between it's not a kids movie and it's not specifically like an adult movie. It's like a nostalgia movie for adults, but it also is in that transition period where it's where you're watching things that have a little more grit to them, but you're still you know like I was still watching Boy Meets World when I was watching Fright Night, and I wanted this movie to sort of exist in the in between of those two things where it was like 90s early 2000s subculture. Like I also really wanted to make sure that the movie wasn't timed in any way, and so the only time that we reference anything that's like specifically a time period is the Game Boy Color in the beginning of the movie.
Yeah, which I
um
loved.
yeah.
Like the whole time watching this, I was just all the show that I was watching as I get big like Power Ranger vibes from this,
Yeah.
like really big, especially towards the end. Like I don't know what I was expecting going into this film, and I'm so happy that I watched it and people were already praising it. As soon as I got into Screenbox, knowing like, okay, so this movie has essentially a cult following, and I love that. And now it's on a service that a lot of people have now, that a lot of people watch. And I say, after whoever's listening or watching this, make sure you go check this movie out because it is phenomenal. The effects are great. It's so funny how the the crabs like move about and like everything. It's so cool, and I love creature features, and this is a super fun.
Thank you. Did you catch at the end that Radu does all the voices of the crabs?
Yes, yes, I think so. Yeah, and like I'm sorry, but he is like the best person in this movie. Like, oh my god. I didn't write that question down. I really should. But now that we're here, I want to talk about it. How is it casting him?
Yeah, great. The casting was my favorite. Like, if there's anything that I'm really proud of with the movie, like there's a lot that I'm very happy with.
Yeah.
It's exactly the movie I wanted to make, and I'm really lucky that I got to actually make exactly the movie I want to make. But if there's anything specifically that I feel like I nailed, it was the casting. Like I'm really really happy with the performance that like all of the actors across the board I thought were perfect for the roles. And Chase specifically was not what the character was supposed to be. The character originally was supposed to be about 14. He was supposed to be much younger than everybody
Oh
else.
wow.
He was supposed to be like this little younger brother type character. Um, and uh it didn't work. Like we saw a bunch of people, and I really for Radu, I did not want him to be from anywhere. Like he couldn't have been from a country. He had to be from a made up fantasy place that doesn't actually exist. And I didn't
Yeah.
want his accent to like represent anybody. Like I didn't want to be poking fun at like any
Yeah.
group's accent or like foreigners in general. Like I wanted this person to be totally made up, unlike any person you'd ever meet in reality, right? And he's supposed to be more like Ace Ventura or Billy Madison or even like a super ridiculous version of like a Saturday morning cartoon version of Borat, right? With
Okay.
all
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
nuance, right? Like, and a lot of people came in and they did very specific accents, like an Indian accent or like very specific accents, and that didn't work. And so anyway, our casting agent was like, I've got somebody. He doesn't match the description that you sent of what the character should like the age or anything like that. But look, check it out. And it was Chase, and it's like, oh, this is so much better than we could have. He is just incredibly talented, so much better than we could have ever hoped for. And so we rewrote the script to sort of make it seem like maybe like internally the producers were like, well, maybe he's like really good at tennis, and the school brought him over from whatever country he's from to play tennis, even though he's like 35 years old.
Definitely steal. I mean, he's on there. So funny. His dialogue so funny, and there's been so many points where I was like, oh, he's gonna die now. They're
Yeah.
gonna take him away from me, and I'm gonna be upset. And it doesn't happen. He's there for the whole ride, and he legit owns the whole stream on there. So really, great job at casting him, and everybody else too. I think everybody really nails all of their roles in here. Because it's a very crazy movie, and everybody really owns up that craziness. So great
Yeah, they
job on
all
you
really
and your
trusted,
casting.
like they committed, which was you know originally the tone was supposed to be a little bit more into the horror element, and then as it just kind of naturally progressed over the first couple of days of being on set, I decided to lean very heavily into the comedy. And as I leaned further in the comedy, the actors just embraced that. Like there was very little transition for them at all to just embrace the comedic elements of it. And I think some of the crew, like specifically the montage scene at the end, the improv montage, uh, that was shot at about 4 o'clock in the morning, and with very little preparation. We just had stuff in the barn and had to like come up with ideas on the fly. And so people, I'm throwing out this thing, and then one of the actors will improv something, and then we started doing like the push in on the characters as they're talking to the camera. And I think some people on set thought that like, oh, this is totally off the rails now, but the actors never did. They committed from beginning to end to with like the ridiculousness of the movie. So I
Yeah,
was really lucky that they trusted me that, this is the tone we were going for, that we could actually hit that tone.
yeah, it pays off. And this movie, there's never like a moment where I feel like it's dragging, where you have to win my attention over. I realized that's been happening a lot with lately. It's always really refreshing to go back to a movie I've never heard of. on a streaming service or someone's recommending to you, it hits every single note. You're engaged the whole time. You don't want it to end. I didn't want this to end because I was having so much fun,
That's awesome.
especially towards the end with the giant battle. We got the Power Ranger mech battles that's going on and everything. The huge crabs, but also seeing like the evolution of what the crabs are going through throughout the whole movie. So I want to kind of touch on that a bit. Dining the crab. What were you trying to go when you were thinking like I'm gonna make a crab movie? I want to base it. Like, what was your thought process there?
So I've always wanted to make a movie about horseshoe crabs, and I've always wanted to see. I always like I wanted to see a movie about killer horseshoe crabs, and nobody ever made that movie. And so I felt like there was this animal that was ripe for a monster movie that no one had ever done anything with. And so I knew that the movie needed to have horseshoe crabs in it. Like and originally the movie was called The Night of the Limulus, but
Okay.
then my buddy Ari recommended the name crabs. Nobody could say limulus. Like people read it in all sorts of different ways, and nobody knew what that was. It's like the scientific name for a horseshoe crab. So, um, yeah, my buddy Ari was like, "Well, why don't you just call it crabs, like Jaws or Gremlins?" I'm like, it's so perfect too because there's no crabs in the movie. Like horseshoe crabs aren't crabs. So I love the idea that this movie called Crabs doesn't actually have any crabs in it. That just makes me laugh. Um, but yeah, originally it was like evil Pokemon was the way that I
Oh,
wanted
nice.
the movie to be. I wanted it to be Kabuto, Kabutops, and then like evil Blastoise, if you know
Oh,
Pokemon.
yeah.
So it was like this. I wanted a three-stage evolution like you have in Pokemon, and I wanted them to be like the 90s monster movie equivalent of what Pokemon would look like. And so originally that's actually what we used for the like the original concept that I sent to the artist that actually designed the creatures was Kabuto and Kabutops. And uh I knew we needed to be very we needed to start there and then evolve significantly
Yeah,
so
yeah.
that we're not like, hey, look, it's actually Pokemon without the branding. Um, and so we diverted a lot from that, but we also used actual horseshoe crabs. So I grew up um, seeing horseshoe crabs on the beach in Georgia, and so we actually they molt, so you can pick up the shell and there's no animal living in it anymore, and we put like um, clay on it just to give it some more kind of scary features, like some
Okay.
extra ridges and some more contouring and stuff, and then use that for the mold. But the base is actually just a horseshoe crab shell. Um, and then the second creature, we actually basically had to work backwards from the design because we knew that Kurt Carley was going to be our suit actor. So then we based the suit around something that he could fit in the
Okay.
dimensions of like how tall he is and how he would actually wear it. So we worked from what's physically what can we actually put on a human, and then how do we make that look like a crab?
It works
Yeah.
well. Works so
Thank
well.
you. That's Jim Ojala did all of like the suit creation, and then this artist Randall Kaplan did the actual sketches for the creatures. Um, and it was amazing. That was one of my favorite parts. Like in the very beginning in pre-production, I knew that it felt like that was the moment where we're actually making a movie when I was getting sketches based on my, whatever I had in my head
Oh, yeah.
for what the designs would look like, and then starting to see those actually be built was really cool.
And their presence on screen too. It's funny at times, but it's also kind of scary because you just be walking around the street and now there's a crab that's about and seeing them like zip around too. So I imagine you must have had some of them like on a remote control, right, to zip them around. Was that difficult to wire up?
So I don't. I actually didn't do it. I just kind of arrived to set because I was living in New York City at the time, and Jim was in LA, and so we were just doing all of the pre-production between us via text and like sending images back and forth and sending notes back and forth
Oh,
and
wow.
ideas and um. So then I arrived on set and got to see it all for the very first time, like 2 weeks before production, but some of it wasn't even finished. So Um, I think the remote control car one was actually relatively simple because it's just a top piece of, I think it's fiberglass. I think is how they molded the
Okay.
fiberglass, and then they put a remote control car from like Target or whatever underneath,
Now
and then
that's
you
indie
could drive it
filmmaking
like
at
a
its
remote
best.
control car. Yeah, but it's funny. One of the shot that we did the most takes on in the whole film was the shot where the remote control car drives into the bar, and like the
Oh,
crab,
okay, yeah.
the door opens, somebody steps out, and the crab runs into the bar. And we probably had 35, 40 takes of that because the car would hit the wall or bounce off or not get over the little hump, or like we just couldn't get that one little motion right with driving the car. And so it probably took an hour to get that shot, which it should never have taken it. Like we're like, okay, reset, put it back, do it again. And what should have been like, 5 minutes
Yeah,
took
yeah.
took way longer.
It always works in that way too. You think something so simple, and then it turns into this huge, like, mind-bending moment. How what is going on here? It's always
Yeah.
fascinating to hear about those too. Of like what was difficult, on set or anything like that. But I also kind of like hearing about like your favorite parts on set. There scene,
Mhm.
or was it something that you did, but it came out way better than expecting it?
Yeah, there's a lot. Like my favorite scene in the movie is the classroom scene in the beginning.
Okay.
Uh, um, I love, I loved filming that, and I felt like everybody was on firing on all cylinders at that day. And that scene was like, we had some rough stuff in the first couple days. Like we actually had, this is another example of like something that I thought was going to go horribly wrong, but ended up being incredible.
Mm-hmm.
Was we had actually cast a different lead actor for Philip's role,
Okay.
and we filmed a whole day with this other actor, and then he went skateboarding that night and broke his arm,
Oh,
and so we had 24 hours to cast a new lead before we shot the prom scene. Like the prom scene was like the next thing we were shooting. And so anyway, Dylan Riley Schneider came in and took over the lead actor role, and I'm not going to name the other actor, but infinitely more suited for that role. Like the movie would have been fundamentally different without Dylan. Fundamental, not in a good way. Like Dylan just nailed it. And had that not happened, had this actor not broken his arm skateboarding, we would never have gotten Dylan.
yeah.
Um, and then uh, the improv stuff, like the movie for me is kind of split into two different parts. There's like before we started improving and after we started improving, and the dialogue that is my least favorite in the movie is the stuff that I wrote. And then I started hearing actors like offset during lunchtime, like just playing in character with each other and improvising. And I'm like, oh my God, that's so good. It's so funny. It's so good. And so every chance I got after that, we would get the take that's in the script. We would get a decent take in the first one or two takes. And then we would do 3 or 4 takes of improv.
Oh, wow.
And almost exclusively throughout the movie, the improv take is the one we used.
That's
Like,
very
yeah,
I don't think I've
that
ever
was my favorite
heard.
part of directing, was like giving a note
Okay.
for like a here's an idea to improv with, like run with this concept, and then the actors would just play with that, and it would be incredible every single time. Like that part of the filmmaking process to me was some of the most fun I had, was just watching these incredibly talented professionals take an idea that I had and take it to infinity, like just run with it in all these crazy different directions. And it made everything a lot less stressful, and um it just livened up the film in a way that I'm really glad we didn't stick very closely to the script. I mean, we stuck to the script, we got all the pieces we needed, and it only worked that way because they knew what the beats were in the scene and what was
Okay.
important to hit. And so we would always hit the beats narratively that like we needed to hit. Um, but it just added this level of fun that uh we wouldn't have had otherwise.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's so interesting. Normally, people like they allow people to improv, but they don't really like try to rely on that. But you giving them like, option of like, okay, let's do it this way, and then let's try it way that you think would flow better with improvising and kind of go on that with this idea I'm giving. That's I feel like that's a big risk, and for it to
Mhm.
pay off so well in the end, that's awesome, and I think people need to start taking notes from you, because sometimes when actors are just in the zone and they're there and they can bounce off one another, knowing what the script is, but then also kind of going off it way can add a really cool flair to it. Tell that throughout this whole film. Now that you're saying that, it definitely does feel like a lot of these things people would just say, just when talking to somebody. So yeah, that's a great choice. Great director
I
choice.
wanted to keep it loose because I mean it would not work on like there's so many different types of movies that just wouldn't work with.
Yeah.
And if you didn't have actors that played off each other as well as they do, or with characters that are sort of as like the movie's rather low stakes from an emotional standpoint. Like the conflicts are easily resolvable, and the interpersonal dynamics are not terribly emotionally heavy. And so I think those elements together allowed us to do that. There's a lot of situations, a lot of stories you couldn't do that with, but I think this movie specifically like allowed us a little bit of freedom to play with the actual dialogue. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. I'm gonna go back and rewatch this now and like, really try to pay attention whatnot. Um, Another thing I wanted to ask you, just because the scenery of this film is really cool to look at. Where was this filmed? Was it Did you have like a state, or was it actual location?
No, so everything besides the cockpit and the green screen. So the cockpit for the kaiju battle at the end, and then the green screen for that battle were
Okay.
on a soundstage, and then everything else was on set. And this is another example of like we just lucked out. We had originally the two brothers, the lead two characters, were supposed to live in suburbia, and the workshop was just supposed to be a suburban garage. Like I was originally going for like a very Spielberg look. Like I wanted it to be on a cul-de-sac in middle America, right? Like um and the anyway, so we got a house that we were going to shoot in, and the people that owned the house somehow found out that the beginning of the movie featured a sex scene, and they said, "Never mind, you're not allowed to shoot here anymore."
Oh,
And
come
so we were
on, man. Just a
rambling to try to
movie.
figure out. Yeah, I'm like, what? It's a 80s throwback, 90s throwback monster movie. Like
Yeah.
it's kind of
Come
mandatory,
on.
right? Like, and so we were scrambling, and one of our PAs actually found the location that we have, um, untouched. That's exactly what it looks like. Like we moved the trailers from one side of the house or one side of that big barn to the other side of the barn, and it was perfect. It was along the river, which made sense for the narrative of the movie, and all of the things. The best part is like the cockpit, right? So the
Yeah.
main character, for people who haven't seen the movie, the main character is this like scientific genius kid who ends up using building this mech basically at the end of the movie. And all of the stuff that's in the cockpit was stuff we found on location. So our
Wow.
art directors were actually able to incorporate everything that they found because we had to clean up. It was a shipbuilding warehouse. So we cleaned up the whole interior in order to make room to film in. And anything that was really cool, we put aside and used to build the cockpit. And so it was like this serendipitous thing where the actual aesthetics of the movie match only because we lost a location and found this other location.
Wow.
Because originally the giant mechanical shark was going to be built with train parts because I knew that there was a train yard in town that we could film at. But then we tried to get a permit, and it turns out that there's toxic chemicals all over the train yard, and
Oh
we couldn't
yeah,
get the
yeah. Want to
insurance.
deal with that?
So that was another thing. It was like, how are we gonna sell this giant shark at the end of the movie if we don't even have like a place for him to get the materials to build it? And then it just happened that this location had everything we could possibly ask for, and it was yeah, very lucky.
Cool. Oh man,
Yeah.
talk about fate finding its way in a good way of like, oh God, we don't know what we're doing now, and then it's knocking on your door. Hey, we have a place for you. Like, wow, that's so cool. Especially when you hear it coming from indie creators like yourself of you're working on a tight budget already and like got a time frame that you're hoping that you can hit. You got to make sure that you have everybody that's part of the film available for the amount of time you're doing. Scratching your head like, oh no, I don't know what we're gonna do now. We're gonna have to do it like in the middle of the street, and then just have
Yeah.
to green screen everything after. But wow, that's really really cool. I'm happy it worked out in the end. Because I love this movie.
Thank
I
you.
do. It's super fun. Um, so I want to move on to Greenbox and how they got involved with. Was it something that was in talks with before? Did they see your movie beforehand? Because I know Brandon Hill works with Cineverse. I know he's the one that does a lot of the everything. So I'm always really curious how they found your film.
Yeah. So we won the Fandor prize at the Mendocino Film Festival.
Okay,
And Fandor is owned by Cineverse. They're one of the streaming channels on Cineverse. And so I asked the Mendocino Film Festival to put me in touch with Fandor. And then they put me in touch with, they're like, you definitely want to get it on Bloody Disgusting TV and Screenbox. And so then I went to I talked to Brandon and we set it up. We set it up through him. Um,
awesome,
and originally, because the movie actually came out last November, but I self-distributed it. So I put it up on all the TVOD platforms. So it's on like Google and Amazon and iTunes. And um, I did my own Blu-ray release for it too. So the Blu-ray's on Amazon, and uh, it's that's to me that's like the definitive version of the movie.
okay,
Because I feel like I learned how to be a filmmaker by watching behind the scenes on Blu-rays. And so like from the beginning of the process, it was really important to me have like an awesome kick-ass Blu-ray that had like tons of behind the scenes making of uh bloopers, all that stuff. Um, so I wanted to get those out first. So I got the TVOD out and then I worked really hard on the Blu-ray. And then once that was done and we kind of like I watched the graph, like a bunch of people bought the Blu-ray and then the Blu-ray kind of went like this. And so now that the Blu-ray sales are down, the TVOD sales are down, then it was like, okay, now's the time to go on to streaming service.
awesome. I gotta pick out that Blu-ray. I watched this movie last week, so it's still pretty fresh in my mind, and I want to watch it again. Talk to you so that way I learn some more information going back into. That's awesome though, and I'm like I said before, I'm really happy that you're on the stream service that is go for the fan filmmakers, actors of these. They push so hard for everybody,
Yeah.
and I'm so happy to see this on there. And thank you for wanting to chat and talk about the film. But before we get going and whatnot, is there anything that you're working on now that you can?
I have a couple scripts that are in various states. I've been working full time on CRABS, um, and it really depends on how well it does. If it does, right now we're number 2 on Screenbox, which is awesome. Um,
Yes.
yeah, and we'll see what happens after that. I think Crabs took a very long time to get made, and I made every mistake I could possibly make in
Of
making it.
course.
So I'd really love to be able to learn from that and do something that where I don't make every mistake again, make all new mistakes instead. Um, but it's also a very challenging time in the film industry. Like getting movies made is very difficult, and I think right now it is particularly difficult. And so I've sort of put filmmaking on the back burner and focused on other things
Okay.
for the time being. um, when the time's right to make another movie, I am dying to do it. Um, but it's also not really a way that I can afford to take care of my family and
Yeah,
put food on the table. So it's it will happen. I will make another movie, but I need to figure out a way that I can do it and it be financially viable.
that's awesome. And if you ever, need help with anything, ever gonna do fundraising, which one thing a lot of people has been pretty good. I'd love to help you, get that
Thank you.
started and promote you as much as possible because I love your style of writing and just how you things are shot and just this
Thank you.
how everything kind of goes through and making me really feel like a kid again by watching this film. How crazy it is and like, oh wow, yeah, I saw this from, or this reminds me of that. It's always really cool to films that feel. I feel like you
Yeah.
don't get that so often. Thank you for being the one who did that.
Yeah, you're welcome. I appreciate that. That's what I was going for. So I felt like so many movies were, especially horror movies, were kind of taking themselves really seriously. And
Yeah,
I don't remember the movies I grew up on doing that. And so I was like, okay, I'm gonna try to do what they did. And I'm glad that I'm glad that came across.
yeah, you nailed it. And I have a suggestion for your next movie. You should call it Lobster.
Lobster, I
have it
like that.
have
That's
it
good.
based in Massachusetts.
That's awesome. We can shoot it in
Lobster.
Rockport.
Yeah.
That's great. I like that. That would be
That'd
really
be
fun.
awesome. And then you can have crabs and lobster fighting together.
That would be really cool. You don't even know they're connected until the very end, and like you see the mech shark come at
Yeah.
the Rockport port.
Yeah, that would be so cool. Oh, Pierce, this was awesome, getting to talk to you about this and getting to know it and getting people aware of this film and for everybody to go check it out on Screenbox. Get those Blu-rays, people. Go get them because I'm a sucker for physical media, especially when I behind the scenes. All that awesome on D-rays, whatever it may be. But thank you so much for taking time out of your day to chat with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Anytime.
Yeah. So thank you everybody for listening and watching. Go check this out anywhere you possibly can. Screenbox and mentioned Blu-ray or all of it. Go rent it everywhere. Watch it there. Get like 10 copies of the Blu-ray. Sell it to your friends or whatever it may be. Christmas is coming. Coming. So you know what to do. All right, Pierce. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.